The world can feel like it's constantly undergoing these massive transformations, right?
Oh, absolutely.
One minute you think you've got a handle on things, and the next, everything's shifting on a global scale.
It moves so fast sometimes.
Today, that's exactly what we're digging into. Those rapid, large-scale societal shifts.
Mhm.
We're focusing specifically on how communism spread after 1900 and these powerful movements pushing for economic resource redistribution.
Yeah, a huge topic.
And for you listening, trying to cut through all the noise and get a real understanding of these complex topics, without getting bogged down in endless details, that's precisely what this deep dive is all about.
Exactly. We've taken a close look at a range of historical analyses to pull out well, what's truly essential for you to grasp.
Good.
Our focus today has two main parts. First, understanding how communist power rose and solidified in China.
Okay.
And second, examining various movements across Africa, Asia, and Latin America that aimed to fundamentally change how economic resources were distributed.
So think of this as your streamlined path to understanding these pivotal moments in history.
That's the idea.
We're not just reciting dates and names, we're focused on the core reasons these changes happened, their significant consequences, and, some of the really unexpected twists and turns along the way.
There are definitely some surprises.
Our mission for this deep dive is clear: to give you a solid understanding of the key factors that drove these massive historical shifts and what their lasting impacts have been.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with China.
Right.
From some of our earlier discussions, you might recall that China's imperial rule ended with Sun Yat-sen's 1911 revolution, which established a republic.
Correct. The end of centuries of imperial rule.
But that really just set the stage for a period of intense upheaval, didn't it?
It absolutely did. The creation of the republic didn't automatically lead to stability. Not at all. So what happened? Well, by the 1920s, significant internal tensions were building up, particularly directed at the Nationalist Party.
Many within China saw them as being too influenced by Western powers, by their institutions.
Ah, okay.
And this created an opening, sort of a vacuum, for a new political force to emerge. And that's where the Chinese Communist Party, under Mao Zedong's leadership, really stepped in as the main opposition.
So it wasn't a straightforward path from empire to republic.
Far from it.
There was this fundamental disagreement about China's future, its direction, which then erupted into the Chinese Civil War in 1927.
Exactly. A direct struggle for control of China between the nationalists and the communists.
Mm.
And this wasn't a simple, isolated conflict either.
Hmm.
What's fascinating to consider is how external events got tangled up with this internal power struggle.
So what?
Well, in 1931, Japan launched its invasion of northern China,
Right, a major external threat.
a huge one. And this common adversary, it actually led to a temporary pause in the Civil War.
Really? They stopped fighting each other.
Pretty much. By 1935, the nationalists and the communists essentially set aside their differences to concentrate on resisting the Japanese invasion in the lead-up to World War II.
A temporary alliance, then, facing a bigger danger. But it sounds like once the Allies defeated Japan, with the U.S. playing a big part there and the Second World War ended, well, those underlying tensions just bubbled right back up.
They did. The Civil War resumed almost immediately.
And picked up where it left off.
Pretty much, yeah. And this time, the communists had a considerable advantage. They received aid from the Soviet Union, for one thing.
Ah, okay. Soviet support.
That, combined with other factors like popular support in the countryside, ultimately led to their victory.
And then the big moment.
Yes. In 1949, a truly pivotal moment,
Mhm.
Mao Zedong stood in Tiananmen Square and declared the establishment of the People's Republic of China.
A complete transformation of the political landscape.
Absolutely.
And with the communists now in power, one of their main priorities was land redistribution, right?
Top of the list.
This was a massive undertaking, nationalizing industry, so government taking ownership,
Yep. Key industries.
and collectivizing agriculture, which meant consolidating private land into these big collectively owned farms.
That's right. Combining plots, shared labor, state control.
What stands out to you about how this was done in China compared to, say, the Soviet Union? Because we often hear about the Soviet experience being pretty brutal.
That's a really critical point for understanding these movements, actually.
Yeah.
Looking at the broader trends, the approach to land redistribution in China was, well, notably different from the Soviet experience.
How so?
In the Soviet Union, collectivization sparked huge internal resistance. It led to devastating famines. Millions died.
Horrific.
It was. In China, while it was still a massive and disruptive change, it was relatively more peaceful in its initial stages.
Interesting. Why the difference?
Well, a big part of it was that the Communist Party had already cultivated significant support and trust among the peasants during the long Civil War.
They'd laid the groundwork.
Exactly. They had effectively aligned themselves with the rural population's desire for land reform in a way that perhaps the Bolsheviks hadn't quite managed before their own revolution.
So that pre-existing trust with the rural population made a difference in how this huge shift was initially received.
It certainly seems to have helped smooth the initial transition, yes.
But then Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, his ambitious economic plan for rapid industrialization. This is where things took a really tragic turn, didn't they? And it's interesting how his vision for Chinese communism differed from the Soviet model.
It is. Joseph Stalin's 5-year plans in the Soviet Union had a very strong focus on industrializing the cities, the urban centers.
Right. Heavy industry.
Mao, on the other hand, championed small-scale industrialization, but in rural areas.
Out in the countryside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea was to mobilize the entire population in both farming and local industrial production, like backyard steel furnaces, that kind of thing.
How did that work out?
Not well. The industrial goods produced in these rural settings were often of very poor quality, pretty much useless.
Oh, dear.
And tragically, coinciding with this big push for industrialization, there were severe bad harvests, droughts, floods,
A perfect storm, almost.
a devastating one.
And the consequences were catastrophic. We're talking about the starvation of, what, an estimated 20 to 50 million Chinese people?
The numbers are just staggering, mind-boggling loss of life.
And what's so deeply troubling, according to the sources, is the role Mao himself played in making that famine worse.
This raises a really important question about leadership and the impact of rigid ideology.
How so?
Mao was apparently so determined to showcase the strength and uniqueness of his vision of communism.
His specific brand.
Yes, that he actually refused offers of foreign aid during the famine.
Refused aid, while millions were starving.
Yes, and even more tragically, he continued to export grain, the very grain that could have saved millions of lives at home.
Unbelievable.
This period starkly illustrates how even ideologies with stated goals of improving people's lives can lead to absolutely devastating outcomes when combined with inflexible leadership and, frankly, flawed policies that ignore reality.
It's a stark and tragic example of ideology just colliding head-on with reality.
A terrible collision.
And this also connects to the growing tension between China and the Soviet Union, doesn't it? You mentioned earlier that China viewed Soviet communism as corrupted.
That's right.
How did the Great Leap Forward and its different approach to industrialization contribute to that increasing mistrust between the two big communist powers?
The contrasting approaches were definitely a key factor in the growing ideological rift, the Sino-Soviet split.
So China saw the Soviets focus on cities.
As a deviation, as moving away from what they believed were the core, peasant-focused revolutionary ideals. Mao genuinely believed his rural-based approach represented a purer form of communism.
Even though it failed so badly.
Well, the failure of the Great Leap Forward, while obviously devastating for China, didn't necessarily shake Mao's deep-seated conviction in his own vision. If anything, it likely reinforced his perception of ideological differences with Moscow and deepened the mistrust between these two major communist states.
Wow. Okay, so we've seen this massive transformation in China shaped by internal conflict, external pressures like Japan, and this very distinct interpretation of communism under Mao.
A unique path, for sure.
Now, let's shift our focus a bit and look at other parts of the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America, where movements for economic resource redistribution were taking place, sometimes with socialist or communist leanings, sometimes driven by other factors.
Right. It wasn't just China. These ideas were spreading, adapting.
Let's start in Africa with Egypt and the Suez Crisis. The Suez Canal, built by British and French interests back in 1869, was a hugely strategic waterway.
Absolutely crucial. It was the main link between Europe and Asia, cutting travel times and costs dramatically.
Made it a massive strategic asset.
Exactly. And by the mid-20th century, British control over the canal was a major source of resentment in Egypt, a key issue in their push for full independence in that post-colonial era.
Right, decolonization was happening everywhere.
And this really sets the stage for the Suez Crisis of 1956, though the roots go back to Nasser coming to power in 52.
Gamal Abdel Nasser. Now, he wasn't communist, according to our sources.
No, more of a pan-Arab nationalist.
But he definitely implemented socialist-leaning reforms. And the nationalization of the Suez Canal in particular, bringing it under Egyptian ownership and control, that really provoked a strong reaction from the West, didn't it?
Oh, it certainly did. For Britain and France, losing control of the canal was a massive blow economically and geopolitically.
So they reacted strongly.
Their response, in coordination with Israel, was to launch an invasion of Egypt.
Okay, military action.
But here's where things get really interesting, especially when you think about Cold War dynamics.
What happened?
Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev threatened military intervention against the invading forces, Britain, France, and Israel.
Okay, Soviets rattling their sabers.
But then, in a surprising twist, U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower stepped in.
The U.S., what did they do?
He put immense pressure on Britain and France, his own allies, to withdraw their troops.
Eisenhower pressured Britain and France to back down against the Soviets.
Well, partly to avoid a wider conflict with the Soviets, but also maybe to assert U.S. influence and limit Soviet gains in the Middle East. He essentially forced them out.
That's fascinating. The U.S., staunchly anti-communist, siding against its own allies.
It really highlights the shifting global power dynamics, doesn't it? How national interests and Cold War calculations could sometimes override traditional alliances or strict ideological lines.
Absolutely. A complex game.
Very complex. Now, moving to another part of Africa, Ethiopia, we see a movement with more explicit socialist leanings. The 1974 Ethiopian Revolution.
Led by Mengistu Haile Mariam.
That's right. This revolution overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie, whose government was seen as aligned with Western interests.
And in its place.
Mariam established a socialist government, which then got support from the Soviet Union.
Okay, clear alignment there. And like other socialist movements, land redistribution was a central goal.
It was, absolutely, a key priority.
But the outcome?
Tragically different from, say, the initial period in China. Under Mariam's authoritarian rule, the policies led to widespread famine, disastrous economic strategies, and frankly, a brutal reign of terror, the Red Terror.
So, similar aims, vastly different results.
It serves as a really sobering reminder, doesn't it, that even when movements share similar ideological goals, like land reform, the specific context, the methods used, the leadership, it can all lead to vastly different and often tragic outcomes.
Definitely a cautionary tale. Okay, let's turn our attention to Asia now, starting with Vietnam.
Right.
We know Japan occupied French Indochina, which included Vietnam during World War II. After Japan's defeat, Vietnam declared independence, but it didn't emerge unified. It split, right?
Right. Yes, it became divided. A communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh, and an anti-communist South, initially backed by the French, then later by the U.S.
And the communist government in the North also made land redistribution a key priority.
Oh, yes. In North Vietnam, a relatively small number of wealthy landowners controlled most of the good agricultural land.
So inequality was high.
Very high. The communist government implemented a program that effectively canceled those old ownership structures and transferred the land to the rural peasantry.
Empowering the landless.
That was the goal. A major social and economic upheaval aimed at dismantling those old sort of feudal-like structures.
Okay. Moving westward to India. Gained independence in 1947. Land reform was on the agenda there, too.
It was, but with what our sources describe as mixed success across the country. It varied a lot from state to state.
But one state stands out, Kerala.
Yes, Kerala's experience with land reform is indeed significant, often cited as a success story.
What did they do?
In 1963, they introduced legislation giving tenants the right to actually purchase the land they were farming.
Okay, security for tenants.
And then, the 1969 Kerala Land Reforms Act went even further. It granted full ownership to tenants, set limits on how much land any one person could own, land ceilings, and redistributed the surplus land to those who had little or none.
Sounds comprehensive.
It was quite radical for its time and place. And it had significant positive impacts. Reduced economic inequality, weakened the power of the traditional landlords, and really benefited lower castes and peasant communities.
And did it influence other parts of India?
It did. It inspired similar reform efforts in other states, like West Bengal, though the outcomes elsewhere weren't always as thorough or successful as in Kerala. Lots of local factors involved.
Understood. Now let's shift to the Middle East and Iran. The situation there seems particularly complex, starting even during World War II.
Yes. Iran's 20th century was heavily shaped by foreign intervention. During WWII, Britain and the Soviet Union actually invaded Iran. The official reason was the Shah's perceived sympathy for Hitler. They forced him to abdicate and installed his young son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, as the new Shah, someone they thought would be more pliable to their interests.
Wow, direct intervention to change rulers.
And it didn't stop there. In 1951, Iranian nationalists, led by Prime Minister Mossadegh, nationalized the British-controlled oil industry and briefly challenged the Shah's power.
Okay, another assertion of national control.
But then, in 1953, Britain and the United States, the CIA, specifically orchestrated a coup.
A coup.
Yes, to overthrow Mossadegh and reinstate the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, firmly back onto the throne.
So a huge amount of external influence shaping Iran's path.
Absolutely. Now, while Pahlavi's rule became increasingly authoritarian, he also did implement some social welfare programs and, significantly, granted women the right to vote.
Okay, some modernization efforts.
And in 1963, he launched something called the White Revolution. Land redistribution was a central part of this.
The White Revolution. What was the main goal? Trying to counter communist influence.
That was definitely part of it, yes. The idea was to modernize Iran rapidly from the top down, weaken potential communist appeal, and also break the power of the large traditional landholders by distributing land to millions of peasants.
Sounds progressive on the surface. Land for peasants, women's suffrage.
It did. It also included expanding education. But despite these seemingly progressive aims, the White Revolution faced a major backlash.
A backlash. From who?
Interestingly, from two main groups. The powerful Islamic clergy, who saw the reforms as too secular and westernizing.
Okay, religious opposition.
And also from segments of the rural population itself, who were perhaps disrupted by the changes or felt alienated by the top-down approach.
So the very people it was meant to help, some resisted.
Some did, yes. And this combined opposition, fueled by religious figures like Ayatollah Khomeini, ultimately became a major factor contributing to the 1979 Iranian Revolution that overthrew the Shah.
Wow. It really underscores the potential for unintended consequences, doesn't it? Even from reforms aimed at modernization or reducing inequality.
Exactly. It shows that top-down reforms, even if they have positive intentions on paper, can fail spectacularly if they don't account for the existing social, religious, and political fabric of a society, if they alienate key groups.
A crucial lesson there. Finally, let's turn our attention to Latin America and Cuba.
Okay, Cuba.
Fidel Castro's Cuban Revolution, spanning roughly 1952 to 1959, led to the establishment of a communist state right on America's doorstep.
A major event in the Cold War.
And one of Castro's core goals was to end Cuba's long-standing economic dependence on the United States, right?
Absolutely. That was central. And he received significant support from the Soviet Union in achieving that, and in general.
And land redistribution, was that a major element there, too?
Oh, yes, very much so. Castro's government implemented a significant land redistribution program.
Taking land from?
From large estates, many owned by wealthy Cubans and also by U.S. corporations, which had historically dominated huge sectors of the Cuban economy, especially sugar.
So nationalizing U.S. corporate land as well.
Yes. They also raised wages for many workers and essentially transferred a substantial portion of Cuba's wealth, estimated around 15%, from the rich elite to the poorer segments of society.
A significant shift in wealth.
Definitely. And the U.S. response, particularly the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, organized by the CIA.
Right, that was a fiasco.
It was, and it only served to push Castro further, to radicalize his government even more, and solidify those ties with the Soviet Union.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here. China, Egypt, Ethiopia, Vietnam, India, Iran, Cuba.
A whirlwind tour.
As you consider all these diverse regions and movements, what are some of the key overarching takeaways? What common threads or connections can you see linking these various efforts to redistribute economic resources and the spread of communism after 1900?
Well, looking at the broader trends, several interconnected factors really stand out. First, you have internal tensions within nations, often fueled by huge economic inequality and a deep desire for greater national autonomy.
That seems like fertile ground.
It created fertile ground for these movements to take root and grow, absolutely. Second, you can't ignore external pressures.
Like colonialism.
The legacy of colonialism, yes. The lingering influence of Western powers, and, crucially, the intense competition between the major global powers during the Cold War, the U.S. and the Soviet Union primarily. That shaped trajectories and outcomes everywhere.
The Cold War context is unavoidable.
Completely. And third, of course, you have the power of ideology. Movements like communism and socialism provided a framework, a set of ideas and goals for many of these efforts.
But not always the same interpretation.
Exactly. As we've seen in the contrasting examples, the interpretation and the practical implementation of these ideologies varied enormously across different contexts, different leaders, different results.
And there were definitely some surprising insights that emerged looking at these examples side by side.
Hmm.
For instance, that relatively peaceful initial phase of land redistribution in communist China compared to the violence in the Soviet Union. That's not always the narrative we hear.
There's a key nuance,
Yeah.
yes.
Or the unexpected U.S. intervention in the Suez Crisis against its own allies, Britain and France.
A real politic moment.
And the complex motivations and ultimately those unintended consequences of Iran's white revolution, trying to modernize but sparking a revolution instead, that's particularly thought-provoking.
Absolutely. These nuances really emphasize that history is rarely simple or, black and white. The motivations behind these movements were often multifaceted, the alliances shifted, and the outcomes were frequently unpredictable. Understanding these nuances is essential for truly grasping the profound impact of these historical shifts.
So for you listening, why is understanding all of this relevant today? What's the lasting significance of these historical events involving communist expansion and movements for resource redistribution?
Well, looking at the bigger picture of our present world, these historical events have had a profound and lasting impact on global patterns of economic inequality, on the nature of political transitions, on the dynamics of international relations.
They still echo today.
Absolutely. Many of the critical issues we grapple with, now debates about land ownership, the pursuit of economic justice, the role of external powers in shaping the destinies of nations, they have their roots in these very movements we've been discussing.
So understanding this history gives context.
Crucial context for making sense of the complexities of the world we live in right now.
That's a really powerful point. So as we bring this deep dive to a close, here's a final thought for you to consider. How do fundamentally different approaches to achieving economic and social change, even when they are inspired by similar underlying ideologies, like socialism or communism, ultimately lead to such remarkably diverse and often unexpected outcomes across different societies?
That's the key question, isn't it?
Think about the long-term legacies of these movements and how they continue to shape our world today in ways that might not always be immediately obvious. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.